This data tracks 7,000 Americans, exploring if IQ predicts financial outcomes. When plotting IQ against income, each point increase correlates with a steady rise in earnings. But when researchers mapped IQ against net worth, the correlation vanished. Intelligence has almost no impact on accumulating wealth. The study found that individuals in the top 2% of intelligence were actually slightly more prone to financial distress. 6% of those with an IQ over 125 had maxed out their credit cards, and 11% occasionally missed their bill payments. This creates a paradox. If intelligence is a tool for solving complex problems, why does it provide so little protection when it comes to managing money? The data suggests that building wealth is not a processing power problem. It is an emotional and behavioral challenge that intelligence alone cannot solve. This disconnect is visible in high-status professions. Surgeons and executives handling immense complexity daily frequently struggle with basic financial security or transparent investment scams. Psychologists call this dysrationalia, the specific inability to behave rationally despite having a high IQ. Raw computing power is not the same thing as rationality. Our brains seem to use a different, less reliable logic when personal wealth is at stake. To understand why this bug exists, we have to move past the rational investor idea and look at the actual financial collapses of history's most brilliant minds. In 1994, a hedge fund called Long-Term Capital Management launched with a team of elite quantitative thinkers. Among them were Myron Scholes and Robert Merton, who would soon win the Nobel Prize for their work in options pricing. The fund relied on mathematical models that assumed markets behave logically. Their formulas treated extreme irrational events as if they were nearly impossible. Their blind spot was human panic. They built their strategy around historical data, ignoring the reality that markets have fat tails, rare catastrophic events that happen far more often than a bell curve predicts. Confident in their models, they operated with extreme leverage, borrowing $25 for every $1 of their own. At their peak, they held market exposure exceeding $1 trillion. When Russia defaulted on its debt in 1998, the model broke. LTCM lost $4.6 billion in months, requiring a massive Federal Reserve bailout to prevent a global systemic crisis. These economists were experts in mathematics, but they lacked a grounding in history. Their brilliance led to a complexity bias, convincing them that an intricate model could eliminate the risk of human irrationality. Even Isaac Newton, the man who decoded the laws of gravity and invented calculus, was not immune to market pressure. During the South Sea Bubble of 1720, Newton initially acted with discipline. He realized the stock was overvalued and sold his shares for a significant profit. But as the bubble grew, Newton watched his friends get rich. Despite his earlier analysis, the social pressure of the crowd became overwhelming. He bought back in at the peak of the mania and lost 77% of his liquid fortune. Newton later remarked that he could calculate the motions of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people. His analytical skill offered no protection against the primal urge to follow the herd. Mark Twain was one of the sharpest cultural critics in American history, yet he was a frequent victim of the sunk cost fallacy. Twain spent years funding the Page Compositor, a mechanical typesetting machine. Despite its absurd complexity and constant mechanical failures, he refused to walk away, eventually losing the equivalent of $8 million. Smart people often struggle to abandon failing ventures. A lifelong habit of being right makes it psychologically difficult to admit that an investment is a loss. These cases reveal a consistent pattern. Intelligence does not serve as a shield against cognitive biases. It often makes them harder to detect. This is the intelligence trap. High cognitive ability can lead to overconfidence, causing individuals to overstate their expertise and dismiss alternative views. While some, like the LTCM economists, build models that hide risks, others use their verbal fluency to justify an emotional impulse after the fact. The brain uses its analytical capacity not to find the truth, but to support a position it has already taken. IQ does not equal wealth. Nobel laureates can go bankrupt. and the most capable minds in history have frequently managed to financially sabotage themselves. If intelligence, education, and professional expertise aren't enough to stop us from making these errors, then what is actually driving our financial choices? This pattern suggests our brain utilizes two distinct processing modes. Known as dual process theory, this framework explains why human cognition is often split between instinctive reactions and analytical thought. Behavioral economists like Daniel Kahneman demonstrated that real-world financial choices rarely follow the laws of pure logic. Instead, our brain defaults to System 1, a fast, automatic processing network. System 2, our analytical center, is computationally expensive to run, reserved for high-effort problem-solving. When money creates stress, our belief that we are calculating risk rationally fades as fast-twitch instincts take over. This cognitive shift is rooted in the amygdala, a small structure deep in the brain that serves as our threat detection center. The amygdala evolved for survival in hostile environments, constantly scanning for cues of immediate physical danger. However, the amygdala cannot distinguish between a charging predator and an unexpected medical bill. Both trigger the same alarm, registering as threats to your survival. This triggers a rush of cortisol and stress hormones, preparing the body to fight or flee. This physiological reaction shifts blood flow away from the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning and executive function. This physical reallocation of resources drops our capacity for logical thought just when the situation requires it most. This chart shows the measurable cognitive impact of that stress. Research into financial scarcity shows it reduces cognitive capacity by 13 IQ points, a drop similar to that caused by losing a full night's sleep. During a financial crisis, raw intellect provides little help because the biological machinery required to make a rational choice has effectively been turned off. With executive function compromised, high-income earners display specific, predictable behavioral patterns. The brain prioritizes metabolic conservation, defaulting to emotional shortcuts. This state of cognitive miserliness involves an active preference for low computation pathways. For high earners, this manifests as the better-than theory, where self-worth is calculated relative to social peers. Decisions shift from wealth accumulation to status signaling and image projection. This behavior defines the under-accumulator of wealth, who trades potential appreciating assets for depreciating luxury items solely to maintain a high-status professional image. This diagram illustrates mental accounting, where individuals categorize money into separate buckets. This allows them to hoard cash in low-yield savings while simultaneously carrying high-interest credit card debt. A high IQ provides the vocabulary needed to build elaborate rationalizations for these instinctive, emotional impulses. These individual biological responses scale up into global markets, where millions of instinctive reactions interact simultaneously. This scaling happens through social contagion. When we see others panicking or rushing toward an opportunity, our brains interpret that collective behavior as a survival cue, triggering an urge to conform to the group to avoid being left behind. Historical market panics show this collective biological fear overriding any available data or logic. The same emotional circuitry responsible for these historic panics drove the market collapses of the 21st century. Dopamine-driven greed and the fear of missing out fuel modern speculative bubbles, creating irrational exuberance in volatile assets. Even institutional managers fall victim to overconfidence biases, using excessive leverage that leads to sudden ruin. Global market cycles represent the mathematical aggregate of millions of human amygdalas firing at once. Personal bankruptcies, panic selling, and institutional collapses share a common root cause. This chronic underperformance stems from an inherent mismatch in human biology. We are attempting to navigate abstract financial markets using biological hardware designed 300,000 years ago. The traits that ensured survival for our ancestors, consuming immediate resources and following the herd, frequently sabotage our success in modern financial environments. Knowing about a cognitive bias does not immunize a high IQ brain against it. Pure intellect frequently snaps back or fails when pitted against human nature. Actually, a high IQ can actively worsen the problem. An exceptional mind is uniquely equipped to construct flawless, highly complex rationalizations for emotionally driven financial choices. This leaves us with a difficult problem. If raw intellect is a liability in the markets, and sheer willpower is an evolutionary illusion, how does anyone actually execute the decisions required to accumulate wealth? The solution relies on a concept called decision architecture. This requires shifting the burden of success off of your real-time intellect and onto pre-designed external systems. The most successful capital allocators do not try to outthink their own humanity in the heat of the moment. Instead, they build environments where their humanity simply cannot sabotage them. Warren Buffett uses a practice often called a cognitive autopsy. By keeping a detailed diary of his investment decisions, he forces himself to rely on objective reflection rather than emotional justification. This written record combats a specific psychological glitch known as disjunctive reasoning failure. By forcing the brain to evaluate all alternative pathways and potential outcomes on paper, the investor cannot hide behind selective memory. Another effective architectural tool is the emotional circuit breaker. This is a mandatory, predetermined waiting period introduced before executing any major portfolio changes. Elite investors combine these waiting periods with strict checklists that must be objectively cleared before any capital is allocated, completely removing the emotional heat from the point of execution. These structural guardrails do not create perfect investment decisions, but they successfully prevent catastrophic, impulse-driven errors during times when the market panics. Behavioral economists have developed similar tools for individual investors, often referred to as nudges. A nudge weaponizes our own inertia and laziness, turning those traits into a financial benefit. This diagram illustrates a concept called present bias. It shows how our evolutionary wiring causes us to overvalue small, immediate rewards right in front of us, while a mathematically much larger future reward shrinks into the background. The Save More Tomorrow program uses this bias to its advantage. Employees commit by locking in the decision today to invest a portion of their future pay raises, moving the actual funding action to a later date. It abstracts the decision entirely, bypassing the limbic system, ensuring the investor never feels the immediate loss of their spending power. Automation acts as the ultimate financial defense mechanism. By removing human emotion and active choice from the execution phase, it guarantees consistency over time. Consistency requires embracing what is boring, and this is where high IQ individuals uniquely struggle. Highly intelligent people often find basic, repetitive financial strategies intellectually unstimulating. Driven by a subconscious intellectual vanity, they tend to seek out exotic, highly complex investments, ignoring the mathematical superiority of simple, low-cost index funds. We can see the ultimate failure of intellectual vanity during the South Sea Bubble of 1720, driven entirely by herd mentality. Sir Isaac Newton, possessing one of history's greatest mathematical minds, lost a massive fortune here, succumbing to the crowd's emotional panic. Contrast Newton's failure with the success of Thomas Guy, a contemporary bookseller. Guy possessed extreme emotional discipline, systematically selling off his shares as the bubble inflated around him. Guy did not rely on complex financial modeling. He relied on a strict, predetermined exit strategy and a total resistance to social herding. The market does not reward intellectual complexity or vanity. It exclusively rewards emotional regulation and compounding consistency. This brings us back to the foundational question of this series. Why do remarkably smart people make terrible money decisions? The answer is that wealth accumulation is not an intellectual math problem. It is a behavioral and emotional survival challenge. High intelligence provides the horsepower to earn a massive income, but without the steering wheel of emotional discipline, that power inevitably leads to a crash. True financial intelligence is actually a form of extreme humility. It is the self-awareness required to accept that your brain is inherently flawed and easily hijacked by fear and greed. The most effective financial strategy is to build an automated, boring, checklist-driven system that functions flawlessly, even when you are stressed, terrified, or overconfident. Thank you for watching this Brand Brains documentary. If you found this breakdown of the psychology of wealth valuable, please leave a like. And we want to hear from you down in the comments. What is the biggest, smartest sounding money mistake you've ever witnessed or even made yourself? Make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into business, finance, behavioral psychology, and corporate strategy.